may have struggled with it are really just concrete. And we really believe that if we had learned Montessori math the Montessori way, we would have picked up on those concepts a lot quicker. And I loved math as a kid. I had a math teacher as a father, so I couldn't get away from it, but I wish I had learned it this way. So there are many steps to math in Montessori, starting in infant and toddlers through the early childhood, which is what we're going to focus on, and then it goes beyond into lower elementary, upper elementary, adolescent, and high school. So it's really cool if you ever get to see after what you've learned from us here or see in our classrooms. If you ever get to peek in on an elementary, adolescent, or high school Montessori classroom, you sometimes see some of our materials come back. So it's pretty cool. Math is happening in pretty much all areas of our classroom. Might not think it's happening in like the practical life area or sensorial, but it is happening throughout the classroom. We play games, we do counting, we use numbers. In practical life, we're doing measuring, we're really working on concentration, coordination, independence, and order, which just set the stage for success in math and reading in other academic areas throughout their lives. So in sensorial, a lot of our materials are set to begin base 10. We introduce shapes, we introduce concepts through cubes and visual patterning that result in later on in the trinomial equation, the geometric solids. There's just so many things that we see throughout our classroom. And we incorporate activities into all of our units of study with creating charts and graphs of things we're doing. During our transportation unit, we created a chart of how many, or a graph, sorry, of how we got to school. So everybody signed their name, and we had a visual of who came to school by walking, who rode a bike, who took a train, who took a bus, who took a car, or rode in a stroller. And so we were able to graph and chart those things. I think that's it.
So Alicia mentioned in practical life, what they're really working on is the concentration, coordination, the order, that's independence that's needed in later math works. In the Montessori curriculum, practical life lends itself to language, while sensorial really lends itself to math, but math is seen all around. So in the pictures, you can see they're all focusing in on their work. The first one child is doing buckling or buckle frame for self-care. Another child is pin punching. It takes a lot of focus to pin punch out. It's another tool to cut out. And then another child is sewing. Sensorial is my favorite area. Where you see math in this is when there's a work that's the red rods, where there are 10 rods from smallest to largest, and the children are grading it from smallest to largest or largest to smallest. But here you see base 10 because we have the decimal system. So really early on, the children are introduced to this. Then there's the pink cubes, brown prisms, and knobbed and knobless cylinders, and they're all about understanding size and dimension, grading from smallest to largest, and using visual discrimination by size, color, shape, pattern recognition. In sensorial, what they're doing is organizing. When they're doing the small hexagon box that on the bottom right side, the child is doing, they organize all of the shapes by color and then put them together. So really, math is all about organizing and being able to
put together the concepts. Yes. Technology is not my strong.
So in these pictures, there is a child on the top left-hand corner doing the trinomial cube. This relates right to the trinomial, the equation in geometry.
This is my favorite material. One of my favorites in the whole classroom.
When I was first introduced to this, before I had my training, I did not know how to put it back together. I had a child help me figure it out. And then it became my favorite as well.
You see an introduction to shapes on the bottom left with the circle tray drawer from our geometric cabinet. So it's various sizes of circles, and then we have different sizes of rectangles, triangles, polygons, and other shapes. And so the child is matching to a solid circle, and then the next row of matching would be to a thicker line circle, and then to a very thin line circle. So refining your skills as you go throughout.
Okay. And in the middle, you see there's a child using the brown prisms and the pink cubes. Again, grading from largest to smallest, making a tower and being able to combine those works. The sensorial materials really are for refining all these concepts, and also like just an early exposure to geometry and trigonometry.
Yeah.
And then that's those two.
We also have a picture of our geometric solids. So we introduced these. We have a cone, cube, two different pyramids, prisms, spheres, ovoids, ellipsoids, concepts and names that we wouldn't necessarily hear in a traditional preschool classroom, but they are available for exploration in a Montessori classroom. And the last picture on our page is our knobless cylinders. We have 4 boxes of knobless cylinders that are matched to the knob cylinders, and this is also base 10. So they are graded from largest to smallest, and they can be combined together to create larger visual picture of all the colors together. So in our classroom, we incorporate a lot of math games at circle time and in our jobs. So in our class, we have a friend counter who counts the friends every day. So not only are they just counting by rote, they are counting and putting one-to-one correspondence with their friends. So they count each child in the classroom. We find out how many children are here. We know that we are supposed to have 17, so we say how many are not here. Let's count how many are missing. And then we also figure out who is missing. So we do a little bit of subtraction and problem solving in just in that one job of counting friends. We also have a calendar helper who helps us count the days during the month. We talk about the date. It's a concept that is really beyond preschool and kindergarten level, but we do it. Our children really like to sing the songs that go along with our calendar, and have the turn to have that job and turn over the day of the date on the calendar. We also count up to our 100 days of school, and each child gets a turn. It's another job. It's to mark the 100th day of each day of school, and then we count by tens until we get all the way up to 100. And in our classroom, we have a party on the 100th day of school. We all bring in 100 things for the 100 days, and everybody takes turn counting their 100 things. We had mats and table work all across the classroom with everybody's 100 things that day. It was really cool. And our kiddos decided they wanted to continue counting. So we are on day 127 now of school for the year. So that continues in our room. Throughout the year, we'll play different kinds of word games, just puzzles at circle. We're sitting for a minute and we gather, and we have a minute before everyone gathers. We'll start playing games, especially in the fall. It's really fun. We hear lots of apple picking stories. So we'll use the children in our class or their names if they have picked apples. And you had 10. If you give each one of your friends 1, if there's only 5 other children at circle, how many will you have left? So we'll say 10 minus 5, let's count how many would be left. And we use our hands. These are the best manipulatives that we have. So we often will use our hands and show that it's really okay to use our fingers and counting and figuring and problem solving. And also another way that we have beginning math is in our birthday celebrations. We talk about the time of the year, how the earth goes around the sun every year, but we also have a timeline in photos of each child's life. And so it's a beginning to understand that how time progresses.
In the picture on this slide, it's all of the 100 things that our kiddos brought in to count.
All together on the table. So math, when we get to the actual math with the numbers and the materials, we are journeying through our math curriculum from concrete to abstract. So in developing these concepts and skills, the children actually hold one in their hand to understand the concept of one. We spend a lot of time from 1 to 10 or 0 to 10 to really make sure that they have a full understanding of the concept of those numbers. We want to make sure that they have a counting of one-to-one correspondence. And so we have 5 beads and they're counting each of the 5 beads, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as opposed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or only to 4. So we're making sure that each bead, each object is being counted for one-to-one correspondence. And then we're also making sure that they're matching the correct quantity to the number symbol, so that when they see the number 5, they are able to count out 5 of something and place it with the number 5. So we spend a whole lot of time in this space in our room.
So when they first start, on the bottom left, there's a child doing the red and blue number rods. We start with just the quantity and we just look at the rods and count. This is 1, this is 2. And once they have really mastered the quantity, then we start the symbol and to a numeral. So then they can start associating the quantity to the numeral itself. The next picture, there's a child doing the spindle box, and that's where we introduce the concept of 0. And there's a box that is completely empty, and we have lots of conversations about what does it mean to have 0? Can you show me 0? Like, well, it's not, they'll say it's nothing. Like, so how many should we put in here? It's nothing. So a lot of these, there are Montessori specific materials in the math unit. It's the red and blue number rods. We have sandpaper numbers, the spindle box, there's counters and numbers. The child on the right is doing counters and numbers work. This work starts off with just matching the number to the quantity, but then also going into talking about odd and even numbers. And what's really great about a lot of the Montessori materials, all of them, there's a control of error for them. So at the end of the counters and numbers work, if there are dots left over in the basket, then we know that something went amiss. Let's go and check our work. If there are spindles left in the basket, let's go back and check our work. And the really beautiful thing about the red and blue number rods is that the number 1 should be able to fit in to the rest to check their work. Right. And then in our math curriculum, it starts off from very concrete manipulative materials that they are holding and touching and manipulating, and very tactile. So like in the sensorial area where they have this early exposure, it's all about feeling and using your senses to feel. So to start off with all these manipulative materials, to be very concrete, to count 1, 2, 3, and then it goes on to abstract.
So and on this page, we have just some extensions and variations on our 1 to 10 work. So the first picture has the numbers not in order, and little blue discs to put, there's circles to help for the control of error. But the child is counting out the little blue discs to put on each number that is listed on the bottom out of order. And this is just to help make sure that the concept has been mastered before moving on to the teen numbers. Our next one is another similar counters and numbers in the shape of pumpkins for the fall, and little pumpkin counters. And then the last picture is an extension of our sandpaper numbers, rubbing a crayon rubbing of the sandpaper numbers. Once they've worked with sandpaper numbers a little bit, they're usually ready to move on to some of the other materials. And so we've brought it back in as an extension, and it's quite a popular one. So
Throughout the year, we change up our sets baskets. Like this one is the pumpkins, and then we're working on creating flowers for our next unit that'll start next week.
we've had penguins and ducks and other things. So these are the more advanced math materials that we have in our classroom and are not usually seen in other pre-K classrooms. So in Montessori, we start talking about the concepts of linear, counting, and the decimal system. These concepts happen concurrently. So in linear counting, we begin with the bead stair. It's 1 to 10, excuse me, and it starts with the colored bead bars. And so once we introduce these colored bead bars, whenever we have a bead bar that is representing the number 1, whether it's just a single bead bar or a chain of bead bars, it's always red. When we have the 5, it's always light blue. So these colors are consistent and stay consistent throughout the curriculum of the math curriculum. And we use the bead stair with the concepts of 1 to 10 with the teens, and then it comes back in with our short chains and long chains, which are the squares and cubes of numbers. So when we learn the 3 squared is 9, we kind of just learned 3 squared is 9, but the children actually see it, and it's a square of 3 bead bars that creates a square, and it's equal to 9. And so it's just making that concept that's really abstract concrete for them. They can see it, they can hold it in their hands. While these things are happening, we're also doing the introduction to our decimal system, which is teaching place value. And so we have a unit bead for 1. And then for 110, we have 10 unit beads that are made into a bar, you can see in our picture, and then 10 bars are made into 100 square, and 10 squares are made into 1,000 cube. So the concept of 1, 10, 100, and 1,000 are concrete for the children to work with and manipulate throughout the rest of our curriculum. So in the decimal system, we do the large decimal layout where they're matching the numbers from 1 to 9,000 with the correct quantity of beads or tens or hundreds or thousands. After that, we move on to fetching, where we'll give the children the numbers in print, and they'll go over to the shelf where we call the bank and bring back the correct number of the quantity of the beads to match. And then we start doing operations, which is really cool because then they're adding the numbers in the thousands together and creating even bigger numbers. And so the picture that you see of one of our children is doing the 100 board. So this child sorted out the numbers by tens and then began counting from 1 all the way to 100 and placing them on the board. It's also a very popular work in our classroom.
And it needs a lot of focus.
Yeah, it takes a very long time to do. Yep.
So on the top left, you'll see that that's our bead stair with the number 1 being red and number 10 being golden. We have a child matching the beads to the number, to the numeral. And we have a child doing the teens board. Underneath our bead stair, we have a child doing an extension and creating her own bead stair with pre-cut circles and making, making sure to remember that, oh, number 1 is red. And when a child forgets, we have a bead cabinet in the classroom that they can go back to remember, or even go back and do the work, bring out the work to see if how to check their work. And then we have on the top, there's a child doing the teens board. And this is a really cool, I think it's a really cool way to understand what the teens are. It's like, what happens after 10? It's like, this is 11. 10 and 1 make 11. And, they don't understand that until they use these beads, which are, I think, beautiful that we start off with these beads like early on, and it continues on, and it's just beautiful to me. So in the top where they're doing the teens board, we say like, this says 11 and this shows 11, let's count and make sure there's 11 there. And so they have a golden 10 bar, and they add the 1 red bead. Underneath, it's an extension of teens, where the child is counting the dots on the red envelope and then choosing which one is the correct number of dots. On the right side, on the top right, there's it's skip counting, so short chains. And you can see they match the arrows as they are counting. They're matching the numbered arrows to where it should be. And the bottom child is doing the long chain, and you can, right next to him is there's the squares and the cubes. And we can, like Alicia was saying, we are able to manipulate these chains to create the square and the cube and say,
all right. Yeah, so we fold it up and we can show that the chain is the same as all the squares, and the squares are the same as the whole cube. So if we count the beads in the chain, we'll know how many are in the cube. I think a fun thing to note on these two pictures, just because we know that we did them, is that these two children were working at the same time, and the one chose to do the 4 long chain and came over and asked to borrow the square for his work, which is why there's not a yellow square on the top work, because it's being borrowed for the bottom work. And we just have some more pictures of some of the materials that we use with the linear counting. So the snake game. Snake game is where we put together, we have a controlled way to do it, where we're first introducing it, and then the children can pick as many or as few as they want, but it's the colored beads come together, and then every time we count to 10, we replace it with a golden bead. And so initially the goal is to turn the snake into a golden snake. And then our friend is doing another long chain. You can see that the purple chain snakes around one mat. That's the 6 long chain, and you can see that his arrows for counting are laid out on his workboard, and he has all the squares and the cube next to them ready to be placed. And then this last one, this is amazing work. This is our 10 long chain, so it's the 1,000 chain. So this child has counted from 1 to 1,000, and labeled all the 10s as she went around, and put the 100 square on every 100, and is just finished and had just put down her 1,000 number and was going to get the last of the squares and the big cube. It's a really impressive work. It takes up 2 mats if we snake it around like this. If you do it lengthwise all the way out, it takes up a lot of space. And so we typically swirl it around so that it can be done.
There's the layout that Alicia and I love.
Yes.
And you can see on their faces how proud they are of being able to match all of that. Usually we'll start off with 2 or 3 friends doing it together. It is a pretty long work. Mm-hmm. I remember, I think this year or last year, we had 2 friends working together, and at lunchtime or right before lunch, like, we did a hard work, but it was lots of fun.
Yes, it's really great. They usually do it a few times before we move on to the fetching. And it's just really fun to see their faces light up when they realize they know how to do it, and they don't need us to be there at all helping them, because then they'll sometimes start it on their own and then come find us and say, look what we did. And that's when we really know that they really have started to understand this concept, this abstract concept of the decimal system. And so the next step is, in the middle picture, is fetching. So this child had started with just a couple numbers, so the 10s and the units, and then we add the hundreds and then thousands. So this time she was doing fetching of all 4 digits. So she has thousands, hundreds, 10s, and units. We always lay out our units first, and then count our 10s, and then hundreds, and then thousands, because when we combine them to add together, that's how we count when we're adding together. So she's done fetching. She's working on laying her 3rd number down. If I remember correctly, she did at least 2 more after that, because she was really excited to be doing this step. This is a step that another one that we spend a lot of time on, because they really need to understand the numbers, make sure they're getting the correct quantity. Otherwise, if we move on too quickly to addition, it gets really confusing and difficult, and we want it to be fun. The other 2 children are doing addition with the golden beads. static addition, meaning there's no carrying, we call it exchanging. And so they're adding numbers together that will all be lower than 10. And so they've collected their numbers from the bank, from the shelf, and they've brought them together. In the bottom, he's already combined them together and is starting to count them to get his bigger number. So we combine two smaller numbers together to get a bigger number. I don't even think we used the word addition for a while.
Yeah. We start off with
combined numbers.
Yeah, we're combining numbers. We usually start off with combinations of 10 when we first start with addition. With we have
there it is.
We have the addition strip board, which they're using these the blue and red rods to create different combinations of numbers. So we'll start off with combinations of 10 and let's see, what do you think 1 and 9 will make? Can you get the one blue bar and I'll get the red, and the red bars are slotted so that they can count on. So number 1, the blue 1 will be 1, and then they count on the red one all the way to 10.
They can also, if they want it, once they understand that concept, they can follow their finger along and look up to the top of the strip board, and it has the number. The next two are our multiplication. So the multiplication box with bead bars. So the first one is 5 one time. We count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then our answer is on the bottom underneath. The next one is 5 2 times, has been counted, gets to 10, and then 3 times, and he's working on 5 4 times. Same concept, but in red beads, so slightly more abstract, is our multiplication bead board. So this child is doing multiple of 4. So he is on 4 6 times and is counting it. And so we introduce it by saying 5 2 times or 4 6 times, because, and in the order that we do our operations would be addition, then multiplication, because multiplication is simply adding a number multiple times. And then we would move on to subtraction and division. Our materials can go through long division in the early childhood classroom. We don't often get to long division. We usually get to simple division of, here's 8, and we're going to divide it in half. What do we have? And as Sultana mentioned at the beginning, our goal is to move towards abstraction. And so we spend a lot of time with our golden beads in the decimal system. And then you can see that this child has started to move towards abstraction. And so we're still doing units, tens, hundreds, and thousands, but instead of being represented by beads, they're now represented by a stamp, and they're all the same size and the exact same shape. And the difference is that they're color coordinated. So units are green, tens are blue, hundreds are red, thousands are green again, because they are the units of the thousands family. So if we were to go into the 100,000, you would see again that the 10,000s would be blue and 100,000s would be red, and then million would be green. And so the number is simply printed on the stamp. And so it has moved towards abstraction. So the concept of units, tens, hundreds, and thousands is we're working towards a mastery of that concept. And so we're moving on to abstraction. The next step would be to use this abacus, which is really cool because we don't see them very much. And so it's a fun thing that we get to do every so often in our classroom with the more advanced math materials. And so once it's been mastered with addition, then we would add in doing it with multiplication. We can do it with subtraction and division for all of these things. So.
And then we have some more math materials that don't really fit into the other categories. We do a lot of measuring in the classroom. There's standard measuring with a ruler. We have rulers available, non-standard measurements for, when we're doing different units. Like for our next unit for plants, we're gonna ask how many beans long is this plant? Or, 1 year's how many blocks long is our classroom? And so the children would put down the blocks to count how many blocks long the classroom would be. We do a lot of, when we do our cooking, we have the children come and measure. And on the right hand picture, you can see a child measuring out the salt for our Play-Doh.
That was fun. And we also, you can see we check height. This is a concept that is a little bit abstract, but we have a couple different colored pieces of tape. It's hard to see, but we measure in September, October, then we measure again in January, February, and we'll measure again in May or June, depending on everybody's being present. And so it's really cool because they come over and they say, look, that's where I was, and look where I am now. Look how much taller I am. And so they really get a kick out of checking out who's grown and how much they each have grown. So we've got that project going on. It's a year-long thing. And so just incorporating more ways of showing them how we can use math throughout our lives.
Here's a picture of us charting ways we get to school. This child is signing her name under train.
And time, we have lots of different ways to explore. This is one of my favorite pictures that was taken. This child is just intently watching the sand timer. It's a minute. We use it in playing our silence game at Circle. Sometimes we say, let's play the silence game. We just sit and listen to the silence and see what we can hear, or hear what we can hear. And sometimes we'll use the timer in the middle of Circle 2. We'll just flip it over and we just sit. It's fun because they'll point out if we make a noise very quickly. And
some of them really just enjoy the silence and they won't realize that the sign timer has done.
And then eventually we play something called the walking silence game, which takes way more than 1 minute. So in that game, we start the silence game at Circle, and then one of the teachers moves to another side of the classroom and whispers each child's name, and they walk silently over. And then once they've all joined, then the silence game is over. So that takes much longer than 1 minute. So it's playing the game throughout the year to get to that point. And then these are just 2 pictures of some of the other materials in our classroom, fraction skittles and telling time. We start with the o'clock. That's the easiest one to tell when the minute hand is on the 12 and then the hour hand is facing other numbers. So we have a wooden matching material. We also have a clock that they can use and manipulate. That's it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. If you have any questions.
That was great. Yeah, I mean, and the math curriculum is so big that it's impossible. This is only a glimpse. Obviously, it's only been a half an hour of going over everything, but it's such a rich, you can tell, what a wonderful curriculum it is and how many ways that children are able to explore. And like they said, this continues up through their education. They can picture these concepts in their mind as they're looking at the materials. So
I did have a question that I did ask Sultana a little bit yesterday, but I was just curious what the transition from the richness of these materials to a more traditional kind of kindergarten environment is like for them in terms of math. And how can we support them, coming from this into something a little bit different that might be a little bit more abstract off the bat, for instance?
Right. I think encouraging to still use manipulatives at home, and they always have manipulatives on them, just taking advantage of the things we have. And kindergarten, as far as I know, I have 2 boys. They've moved on from our program from doing kindergarten here to going first grade. I think it helped them. They might not have the materials right there, but they have the concepts that are still there, and they remember using the materials. But also a kindergarten class isn't going to go straight to abstraction. They're going to have manipulatives because they've seen that that's best practice for children, and not to just jump straight to rote memorization and
yeah, I would say, I would echo that they're going to have it. It's not going to be as beautifully organized and sequential and well planned out, I don't think, usually. And I also feel like a lot of times when children leave our program and they go to kindergarten, they're going to say, oh, I've done this before. and they find it fairly easy. Now, that's not to say that some children still struggle in some math areas that find it challenging. But I think it's a very good preparation. So I don't, I haven't seen or heard of too many that have felt that it was a difficult transition at all. In fact, it's just, as Alicia said, it's been a huge benefit to them.
I think also it'll be the same concept maybe that they're looking at, but in a different way.
Yes.
Just like in our classroom when we, we change up our math materials, but it's honing on the same concept, but using different manipulatives, using different, just even if we change up the number card to a a wooden number, like it's different materials engage them.
I can second that. Just in the homework assignments that have come home this year from my children, it's, they're doing the same math concepts of writing a number equation, but I've at least 5 different ways to solidify that concept have come home this year. So yeah.
I had a quick question. So I have a young toddler in the young toddler classroom. So he's not even 2 yet. But in terms of the curriculum and the materials used in the older early childhood classes, are these usually made known to parents before, just the curriculum and what tools are being used, just so we can kind of be prepared at home for when he eventually reaches that stage. We already kind of understand how the math is being taught in the Montessori way. Even just this presentation, I'm like, wow, I learned math totally in a very different way. And this makes a lot more sense. And I just want to be able to reinforce what's taught at school at home and lessen that confusion.
So usually in the beginning of the year during curriculum night, you'll kind of get an overview of how math is being taught in the classroom. And it's different. Here we are able to elaborate much more than we did in our curriculum night, but that's where you would probably see. And then in the newsletters and peaks that you get every week, you'll see what kind of math materials they're working on.
And it's probably likely that you're doing things already, and as part of your you're probably already doing things like the singing and the singing different songs, and as you line up, and many of the things that they do in classroom are math related, but not necessarily directly like a math. In toddler, it's a little bit different. It's a little less distinct, although there are some of those counting exercises and measuring and things like that as well.
Yeah.
Even in our classroom, we also encourage, as I'm sure that Alex and Rachel can attest to, we encourage counting and in ways that make sense at home. So setting the table, how many forks do we need to put at the table? Or when baking, practicing, helping them to pour, to measure, all those life skills. That's really where the math outside of the classroom would come into effect.
I was gonna say, even my son is in a toddler classroom and he counts up to 10. And the other day I was like, when did you learn how to count to 10? Not that he knows the association between the quantity and numeral, but it's just being able to count to 10 when he was looking for me. And it's like, oh.
What in the materials that you were just going over, what kind of age or grade kind of groups are those, or when are they starting to use those materials?
So our materials are for 3 to 6, the early childhood classroom. Sometimes some of the beginning 1 to 10 works are brought into toddler classrooms, but not necessarily in the same way that you would see them in the early childhood classroom. But our materials are made and prepared for the children that are in the 3 to 6 class.
And are they, I think this is a similar question, but are there other materials or things that we should supplement with, or if we wanted to have, things to reinforce that, or for them to do at home as well? Is there books or games or anything that you guys would recommend or we should look at?
I mean, the kind of games that you can do at home is more like having them in, participating in counting carrots for dinner, or even when you go to the supermarket, we need to buy this many this many
Yeah.
potatoes, that sort of thing.
Right.
And then definitely books.
Yeah, books and walking, even when if you're walking through the park, counting maybe the light posts or the trees or something. But we encourage more of the game side of math at home and let us do the materials at school. Because if they get too much one place or the other, they're really not, they don't show interest at the other side. So but more like the games, and if they're my kids were super into numbers when they were little, and they learned a dodecahedron on Team Umizoomi, I think it was. We live in New Jersey, and we were driving to school, and all of a sudden one of the two boys, when they were 2, started talking about dodecahedron. I was like, wait, what? You're 2, how did that come out? And then another coworker said that her son had watched Umizoomi, and she knew where it came from. I didn't even know where it came from because I hadn't heard it. But just playing more games, hide and seek, counting.
And also just like, things like Candyland and,
Yes.
board games, card games, you can play those as well. Paying for things.
Yes.
Our kids have been really into dice, just like
Dice,
counting the
yeah.
numbers, the pips on dice, and adding if it's a 2-day game.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they've been excited about that.
I know my daughter is 3 and her brothers have started getting into card games. So she's trying to get into them too. So just playing just even playing cards. One of our extensions for our exchange game is with cards. And you count the number, you see the number, you count the pennies. When you get to 10, you exchange it for a dime. The goal is to get to $1 first. And you have to exchange, you have to get to 10 to exchange, and then 10 dimes to exchange for the $1. So just games more so, and cards, board games. I know my daughter really, really enjoys Candyland as well. Her brothers are kind of over it.
But I think anytime you're spending time with your children in a fun way where you're showing them your full attention and you're doing something that's meaningful educationally is really a great thing. So like we'd usually say to stay away from things like worksheets and forcing them to do flashcards or things like that, unless it's something they really like to do. Some kids love that stuff. But most kids would just prefer to, if you had a book, there's math books and there's, story books, picture books that have to do with math, and then just the regular things during the day that we've talked about that make learning really fun for them and a good time for you together. Puzzles, yeah. So is there anything else? Any other questions anyone has? So thanks so much for being here. Thanks to our teachers for giving such a great presentation, and thanks for parents for being here. And we did record this. So if you need to go back, if you came in late and you want to see it again, I'll post it in the newsletter on Friday. And hope you all have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you for
You're
joining.
welcome.
Thanks, Alicia and Sultana.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.